guided tours today. You want to jump in on that? If you wouldn't mind signing into the guest book, we also have some pamphlets that give you information about other museums in the area, and also flyers about upcoming events and a little more about the history of Fort Concho. Which reminds me, would you like some knowledge on Fort Concho? I'm sure you do. So,
what is your name?
Oh, my name? What a great question. I'm Sarah Ross. I'm the education coordinator at Fort Concho. So Fort Concho got started back in 1867, and it's a part of a series of forts that were traveling through Texas as settlers were moving west, so were the forts. Fort Concho in particular is a product because Fort Chadbourne didn't have enough water in their wells, so they had to find a new location. And this was the location they discovered. And if you look, there's nothing in the area for far distances, and they could see any threats on the outside. But also, the Concho River goes through on this side and also on this side, allowing them to have plenty of water, which solved their previous issue. The final building was built here in 1878, and the fort itself was on about 40 acres, though they owned much more for care of the animals and such. Across the river, a community started to form pretty quickly as well, and that is what we now know as San Angelo. It was an economic source for the community, so naturally they would follow the forts. In 1878, the final building was built and opened up in 1879, and that is the schoolhouse chapel. If you ever look, you'll notice that it doesn't match the rest of the architecture at Fort Concho, and that's because it was originally going to be another officer quarters kitchen. However, once they got out there, like, we don't need another one, and the chaplain was like, hey, I've been asking for one for a while now, can I please have it? And he was like, yeah, sure, why not? And so the chapel was built and opened up in 1879. In 1888, the railroad came to town, and soldiers could get here a lot quickly from San Antonio versus the days it used to take. And this fort became unnecessary. So in 1889, in the summer, Fort Concho closed down. Starting in the 1930s, it became the project of Mrs. Carson to rebuild this area as a Smithsonian of the West. And it was to create this new museum that taught all the history out in the West. But in the 80s, they realized this goal was unattainable, and instead they revised it so that we can learn specifically community history and Fort Concho history. And so that's a product what you'll see today. I can definitely show you around. Come with me. So, if you look over here, we have our gift shop. Brenda Lee, our visitor coordinator, absolutely did a fabulous job. Look at the gun display and infantry display. A gun and saber for your kiddos. Well, also, I have to show you, this is our gift shop. Brenda Lee, our visitor center coordinator, put this all together. When you come in here, you can get gifts for your family. There's some postcards to send home to mom and dad. And then we also have all of these books for sale that cover various topics about the frontier. If you look over here, we actually have a map that shows pre-Civil War and post-Civil War Western frontier forts. And you can see how Fort Concho fits within the larger scheme of things. And if you come over here, this is probably one of the coolest things we have. This is the McChristian collection. A while back, Douglas McChristian had the largest private Indian Wars era collection. And when he passed away, the community of San Angelo helped fund us so that we could purchase it, and we now own it. And this is just a small piece that dives into everything about that. And I think our curator will be taking it from here. Also, if you look over here, we have informational boards that discuss Native Americans, and it's a precursor to the Native American collection to come soon.
Okay. And here's another map over here showing military districts.
Yes. The district of Pecos is actually something Fort Concho was in charge of late 70s, early 80s. This whole area worked together, and we were the communication source. Oh, I almost forgot the most important part. Our gift shop also has books for sale. This all covers various topics on the frontier, and my personal favorite is this book. It's called Regular Army O, and I very endearingly refer to it as my Bible doing living history. Any idea you have about soldiers on the frontier, it is covered in this book. Actually, that's the same Christian that the collection we own, he wrote this book along with a couple others. And so any topic you can think of for the Western frontier, we may have it, just so you can dive deeper into our history.
Okay.
Oh, so we're here. Why don't we go ahead and go see Barracks 5? I have a map available for you if you come out here, and it'll show you all the different exhibits we have available on site. But specifically, I really want to take you to Barracks 5. So let's go do that. When I open up this map, you're going to notice there are yellow buildings, there are white buildings, and there are gray buildings. The gray buildings are buildings that no longer exist. You'll notice Barracks 3 and 4 are grayed out. However, that will be changing soon. And then we also have the yellow buildings. Those are our museum exhibits. If you go to any of these buildings, you can develop a better understanding of what it was like to live at Fort Concho in the 1860s through the 80s. All right, let's go see Barracks 5. I have to show you this building in particular. If you ask me what building captures the energy of Fort Concho properly, there's two of them. There's Barracks 5 and there's headquarters. And Barracks 5 is where we're currently located. Come with me. This barracks is set up to replicate the 1878-1879 idea of the barracks. Actually, it's interesting because there are only a handful, not even a handful, of pictures inside of barracks. Just didn't happen. All of this has been put together wonderfully by our curator, Corey, who has done hours and hours of relentless research to figure out that most likely the barracks look like this. Now, all of these barracks didn't necessarily house a specific regiment or company. Instead, it was a rotation. The Army didn't put them in one specific place for many, many years. They were moving from place to place. There was a period there where 9th Cavalry was here for 9 months, but was immediately sent out. 10th Cavalry was one of our longest ones to stay here. How this building is set up, though, is for infantry. And you can tell that because of the use of the materials and also this right here. This is a locked gun rack made for the 1873 Springfield rifle. And then also, if you look at these buildings, the cavalry barracks look slightly different from that of the infantry barracks. But in this barrack, you could house your entire company, and soldiers could come and sleep in here every night. They could fit their entire life into those trunks. And as you're looking around, you'll see, and you can compare this to actually that of the officer quarters. And a second lieutenant is the closest you're going to get to an enlisted man living similar to that of an officer. Once you get above a second lieutenant, your life becomes lavish as an officer. I like to compare the humbleness of the barracks versus mess against OQ3.
The privileged class.
The privileged. Well, you got to consider social hierarchy was the call of the day in the 19th century. Everything was based in social hierarchy. Gender, race, class, they were all integral roles in 19th century society.
The site does have some living history demonstrations from time to time, right?
Absolutely. Throughout the year, especially for federal holidays such as July 4th, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, we have something called living historians who don't necessarily recreate a battle, but instead they interpret what it was like to live as a 19th century folk. And with those living historians, we have soldiers. We represent 16th Infantry Company F that was stationed out here. And we go around and we provide flag details, we provide 3-gun volley salutes as necessary. And so we're able to dress a 19th century garb and speak to people about things we had been researching for years. It's a way to bring your history books to life. So instead of having going to sit down and read just black and white letters, you can actually sit down with us and we'd love to tell you. We've been spending years researching this. This is basically our lives at this point, and so you can ask us. We would like to answer them. We have programs throughout the year. If you go to fortconcho.com, it allows you to see all of our upcoming events and also different aspects of our fort, from the library to collections, and keeps you updated with things going on. You could also check out our Facebook page. If you go to Fort Concho National Historic Landmark on Facebook, that is us, and you can follow us, and we always alert when we have events coming up. One of my favorite programs to host is Campfire Story Night, and we'll be bringing it back this summer. So we'll be eating s'mores and telling stories around a campfire that are 19th century based. And then I must tell you about the most important event of the year. The first weekend of December is Christmas at Old Fort Concho. The entire fort changes. The entire parade field is filled with 19th century and early 20th century living historians. There's over 100 folks discussing different aspects of history. All of our buildings become merchant buildings, and it allows everyone to come out and experience some aspect of life on the frontier, and or they could get Christmas presents for their family. That is soon coming up once December hits. And so Christmas at Old Fort Concho is an important one, and you should be looking out for that on our website.
Now, there was a mix of what you might say regular white soldiers that were here, and then there were the Buffalo soldiers. Did they actually reside in separate areas?
That's an interesting question. So I get this question a lot, and yes and no. It's not how you picture it. It's the fact that companies stuck together, and because there were African American regiments, which break down into companies, naturally there were companies that were separated from black to white. But we also have to consider each company would usually have their own barracks depending on the number of folks here. And so this may have housed a white company one day, but the next day housed a black company. It just depended on what was going on for the Army. The real difference on paper between a black regiment and a white regiment in 19th century thought was every black regiment had a chaplain. The white and black soldiers were paid the same. Buffalo soldiers were expected to do the same duties. There is the thought process that they received less than adequate items, but in fact it was 10th Cavalry to first receive the 1873 carbine, which is a cartridge loader, which is the most fundamental change in the Army that shifted how the Army thought for a very long time. And I say that on paper only because there is the realities of 19th century ideas of race. And so they are a piece of our history. Fort Concho, the West in general, was known as the most diverse part of America in the 19th century. And this is just a small piece of that, and you see it play out here as well.
Okay. One other aspect that I would like to know about is that why were there so many forts in Texas prior to the Civil War and post-Civil War? Was the U.S. Army on some sort of offense? Was it defense?
I would say that's a good question, and I can't offer you an adequate answer. I'll be frank. Because it's complicated, and I wish I could explain the intricacies, but I'm still young to the military history aspect. It was a defense. It was always defense with the occasional offense. Usually it wasn't the Army who did offense, it was a certain officer who was taking up that position. During the Civil War, all the forts shut down. Because Fort McCavitt, for instance, actually some of their soldiers ended up being prisoners because they left Texas too late. And they're actually doing a program on that soon. But in reality, it was more settlers were moving west, and there was no governmental system. So this is part of the reason why Fort Concho opened in the first place. There was no governmental system to regulate. So young lawyers who had no experience could come out here and help and assist in like leading hangings or shootings. There's a lawlessness, which is part of the romanticism of the West, of course. And so the army was serving as a governmental system until a formal system could be formed. Once a community was developed, formed, and the area was deemed settled, fort wasn't necessary anymore, and so it would shut down. So you'll notice there's a lot of forts, but their time frames are all different. It's just dependent on need and demand.
I see. I know in Kansas, along the Santa Fe Trail primarily, and then the Butterfield, Stagecoach lines, many times there were forts set up that would have troops that would travel along with wagon trains, or at least travel up and down those routes, because there were outlaw robbers who were robbing some of the trains, especially some of those trains that might be coming from mining camps out of Colorado and New Mexico, returning with silver and gold back to places where it could be more refined. And then, just protecting new settlers from Native American aggression.
Aggression, yes. Oh, that is such a complicated topic, because also part of the Army's job is they would create agreements with Native Americans, and then white settlers in particular would go and encroach on land that was supposed to be designated for Native Americans, especially near water sources. We see that play out with the Nez Perce, which is over there on the West Coast more so. These forts didn't work as much, Fort Concho in particular, didn't really work as much with Native Americans as other places. This is almost like it's like the 3 Corps is to Fort Hood. I guess that's the best way I could explain it. It's where things are being led. This is the headquarters of District of Pecos. This was like a stop to resupply, plan out your next scouting mission, your next campaign, and then you would head out to the other forts and begin your actual... This whole area was pretty much calm by the time we got here. We only had a couple of conflicts with Native Americans at Fort Concho. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think you've covered a lot of basics here. I hope that people will come and see it for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. If you come out here, you'll have to say hi. In our front office, you walk in, and I hope we make you feel at home.
Well, I cannot make the Frontier Days Living History celebrations this year. Perhaps I can return next year, and you folks that are watching this video, go ahead and make comments below the video here and tell me whether or not you would like to see some excerpts of some of the activity that goes on. But I would really, really encourage you, if you're going to be through this area, or if you live in Texas, New Mexico, Louisiana, Oklahoma, you need to get on down here. I think it's going to be a great event.
Thank you. Every year, the 3rd Saturday of April, we have Frontier Day. So even if you can't come this year, there's always a time in the future where you can come out to Frontier Day. Absolutely. I'll be in OQ6.
And I noticed that there is some construction right next door here. I didn't shoot any video as we walked by, but maybe I'll show a little bit of that.
Okay.
And so what's happening over there?
What's happening over there? We're restoring Barracks 3 and 4. And so that will be our 2 next buildings up, and we will be one step closer to being a complete fort again.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely. You have fun on your tour, and ask me if you have any questions, okay?
Okay, will do.
See you later.
Thank you again, Sarah.